Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Week with a cold, so I hope it'll last for the rest of this, for the whole talk. The main take-home message is that I think informal collaboration is as important, if not more important, than formal and explicit and planned collaboration, and that software, particularly shared workspace groupware, should take advantage of this. So, of course, part of the hidden agenda is that I'm here to try and proselytize, and that this is where you guys have the critical mass, and it would be great if we could get some of these aspects of informal collaboration and support for informal work into some of the collaboration projects and products that Microsoft's already doing. Okay, so before I get started, just to tell you about some of the people who are working on this project. Saul Greenberg is my old supervisor, and he and I have talked about these ideas for several years. And we both have students working on it in various stages of completion. At Saskatchewan, there's Roger Bloom and Jeff Dick, and you'll see some of Roger's prototypes at the end of the talk. And you'll also see one of Gregor's, who's from Calgary as well. And then finally, this talk is brought to you by Nectar, which is a research networks grant from NSERC, but where the major industrial sponsors are Microsoft and Smart Technologies. Right, so what will I talk about today? I think it comes out to about 50 minutes, so I won't keep you for too long. I'll go over some real basics on shared workspace groupware and some of the things that I think are problematic with that type of distributed system. And then move on to informal collaboration, what it is, and what are some of the characteristics that I think are vital from a design perspective to try and add into our shared workspace groupware systems. I'll give you some relatively early systems that we've built. This is much more of a conceptual talk than I sometimes give. So this is more at the beginning of the research project than it is at the end. And so the examples certainly are early. And then we'll talk a little bit about whether this idea is going to work and whether some of the things that you need in order to support informal collaboration are the kinds of things that can actually prevent it from being adopted. Okay, so there are lots of kinds of groupware out here, and let me just narrow down to the kind that I'm going to use as kind of the case study or as the thing that we should keep in mind. And these are all systems that I've built over the last 10 years. I've been working in this area since I started my PhD, and what I mostly work on is shared workspace systems where you have artifacts that you can move around and do stuff with from different places. So it's distributed groupware and real-time groupware where we're working from different locations at the same time. And there are a variety of artifacts, and any document could be in there. And I can guarantee, of course, that you've never used any of these systems because I built them. But I can also probably guarantee that you have never used any shared workspace groupware system other than a screen sharing one like Live Meeting or VNC or something like that. So why is that? And Steve Whitaker wrote a review of shared workspace systems a couple years ago and had this to say, which I will just read. Why aren't shared workspaces used more? Despite the ubiquity of document-centric interaction in face-to-face settings and the demonstrated success of shared workspaces in laboratory settings, these have yet to become pervasive. I think that's really true. And we were talking at lunch about how groupware has kind of always been next year's solution. And it's, it was always the case that soon we'll all be able to collaborate from our desktops and do our work as if we were sitting in the same room at the same time. But it was always kind of just over the event horizon. And this frustrates me now, having been building these systems for 10 years. And so this talk and this research project is kind of an interest in trying to find out why that is. Okay, so one of the things that became clear when I started to think about it is that there are really two kinds of collaboration, or let's characterize it as two kinds of collaboration. One is the situation where you have to collaborate, and the other person is in another city or another part of the world. If you have to collaborate, then the tools that we have actually work pretty well. and setting up a screen sharing meeting or a video conference or even a telephone conference, you can usually get done what you need to do. And so you can work at a distance with a great deal of success. But so that's kind of for explicit and planned meetings. And in a way, I'm not going to talk about those so much. Because the problem is if you don't have to collaborate, then the chances are that you're not going to use any of the tools that we have to do it because they're too much effort and they're just too much of a pain to do for some thing that you don't actually need to accomplish. I'll talk more about this idea of not having to in a bit. But first let's look at if shared workspace groupware of the type that I showed hasn't become pervasive, what kinds have? Because maybe we can learn something from the ones that have succeeded. And there are two in particular that have worked. And I mean real-time collaboration here. Like, of course, emails become very popular, but let's look at ones that are more synchronous. First is instant messaging, and of course this is everywhere. And the second one is multiplayer games. And this is EverQuest, so even though there's far fewer people who use this system than use IM, you can still have 110,000 people online at any one time doing, slaying monsters and so forth. Okay, so the thing about what those systems have, what instant messaging and multiplayer games seem to have when we looked at them and played lots of EverQuest, that the kind of shared workspace systems that I was used to building didn't have was that it was really easy to get into collaboration, and it was really easy to start up interactions with people in these kinds of systems. And so we started looking at the idea of informal collaboration and whether or not that was well supported in current Groupware and whether or not it could be. So now let's turn to informal collaboration and look a little bit at what people have said about what it is and how it works. And of course, you already know what it is because we do this all the time. You walk past somebody's office and they say, hey, could you come in here and take a look at this? And you spend 5 seconds looking at whatever it is that they wanted you to look at, and then off you go again. Or you walk past someone's desk and notice that they're working on the Anderson report, and you say, oh, by the way, you have to change the budget figures for 2008 to be this or whatever. And then you go on your merry way, right? So in an open plan office, or even in an office, a closed-door office situation, we just know to a great degree what other people are doing, and we often stop in and join in interaction with them for a short period of time. Okay. In general, I think that the process of informal collaboration fits like this. And this is one that Saul will harp on if you give him the chance at a conference dinner. You start with awareness. Everything's based on awareness and an understanding that there are people out there to start with, what they're doing, what they're working on, and whether they're currently available for interaction. You then move into communication and start talking about the things that you're interested in. And then after you've gone through the openings that are accomplished through conversation, you can move into more full-blown collaboration where maybe you've got, you're both in there moving things around or sorting slides or whatever it is that you're actually doing. And of course, it's not a linear process in that you move from awareness to communication. It's more of a pyramid, but I couldn't draw that, so I just did it like this. But of course, when you're communicating, you still have awareness. When you're collaborating, you still have communication. Okay, but lots of people have studied informal conversation and informal collaboration, and these are some of the things that they have come up with about this. And in particular, the two that I used most heavily here were Bob Kraut's work on informal communication in the workplace and a paper by Victoria Bellotti and Sarah Bligh called Walking Away from the Desktop Computer, which is a great set of examples of how people coordinate their activities and collaborate in an open plan design setting. So I'm going to go through each of these in very briefly and say what I mean by them, and then we'll turn to what we can draw out of those. This is kind of how the real world works, and how can we learn from that in designing Groupware. So there it is. Great paper if you are looking for something to read.
Where was that published?
That's CSCW 96. Okay, so the canonical setting for informal collaboration, or at least the one that I'm going to use as my reference example, is the open plan office. And this is what well, Bellotti and Bly have a lot to say about this. They say that the ability to walk around inside that office, the ability to see what other people are doing, the ability to overhear conversations are vital for the smooth unfolding of work in this design system or design setting that they studied, and that it was vital to the way in which the company worked. So let's keep that in mind, and then let's go through our list of things. Okay, so first of all, informal communication, and I would say by extension collaboration, is frequent but brief. So a study by Bob Kraut of research collaboration showed a variety of things, that informal collaborations were mostly not previously arranged. They were mostly unplanned in that neither person knew they were going to happen before they actually occurred. And then 21% were opportunistic in that they happened because you saw somebody walking through the workplace or because a certain event happened that triggered the idea in your head that you needed to have this conversation with someone. They're usually less than 10 minutes, and they mostly occurred on whatever you'd call on the home floor of one of the occupants. So this is back to his other thing about you usually collaborate with the people who are nearby to you, and possibly because much of what happens is informal, and it's easier to be informal with those who are available and nearby. Okay, so number 2, informal collaboration is based on awareness. And so here's my lab, and you can see a lot of stuff. If I just look out my office door, I can obviously tell a lot about who's in, who looks like they're busy, who's working on what in general, who's working hard, and who's goofing off. And so I think that all informal collaboration is based on an understanding, a basic understanding of the kind of stuff that you get when you live in an open plan office. And lots has been written about informal awareness, and I won't go into that here, but this is going to be important when we come back to issues of privacy, because you really can't have informal collaboration without awareness, because then there's nothing to suggest to you that you need to talk to somebody. You never phone somebody up and say, let's have an opportunistic collaboration encounter at 2:30 this afternoon. So you need to have this, and that could run us into trouble a little bit later. Okay, so out of this awareness, what are the things that lead to some kind of informal collaboration? And people have written about 3, people, task-based stuff, and interactions between people. So it's obvious how these work, but I'll go through a couple of pictures. So when I see Junlu walk through the lab and I know that I need to talk to him, that is a reminder, or that's a trigger for us to engage or move to the next level of engaging in conversation and maybe getting into some collaboration that happens. And of course, this is important because interaction requires 2 parties, and being able to see that the other person's there and potentially available gives you an opportunity to talk to them. Number 2 is actions and artifacts. And this one, I think, kind of gets left out of some of the informal, the work on informal stuff, because they focus on informal conversations and communications, but so much of what we do is engaged with artifacts and documents. And so if I walk past and I can see that Tad is fixing something on there, those actions or this setting or that artifact might suggest to me that I need to go in and say, by the way, remember to put on a wrist strap, or by the way, that machine's dead anyways, don't even bother, or let me show you how to do that, or can you show me how to do that? Okay, so this is important because some of the tools that we'll talk about later, like IM in particular, don't give you very much about artifacts and actions. And third, I can see that other people are talking in an open plan office. And what's more, I can overhear their conversation. So if 2 people talk that I know are interested in a particular project and they start to talk about that project, I can wander over and engage in the discussion. And this is the kind of stuff that Victoria and Sarah saw in their design firm. So people were always coming over to join into conversations, kind of just sticking their nose in, which is not surprising. It's the kind of thing that happens all the time in these open offices. Okay, so now let's get back. At the beginning, I talked about, if you have to collaborate, then the tools work pretty well, but if you don't have to, then they're not so good. And this is what I mean by this, is that in many cases, informal collaboration is not required by the job. If you want to say to someone, hey, could you come over here and take a look at this? And they say, no, I'm really busy. Actually, I can't. you don't say, oh, well, I can't get my job done. You say, well, that's okay. I'll just make do with what I've got. So much of what we do is individual work, but set into the context of working in a community. We can get it done as individuals, but there are various advantages and subtle, useful features or things that can happen when we have the other people around. But the important thing about optional or discretionary collaboration, if you're walking by someone's office and you notice they're busy, you just keep on walking. The important thing about this is that if it's optional, then the effort barrier to actually getting into it has to be much, much lower than when you're forced into the situation. So the real world is great for this in that it's very easy to initiate collaboration, and the barrier to moving from awareness to interaction and from interaction to collaboration are all very low. I can do it even positionally, but I can sort of hang around on the outside of your work surface and then just walk in. I can see, distances and so forth. But a lot of the tools that we have, maybe aren't so easy to initiate. So this is the important thing to remember. This is something else that Saul has come up with the term for. He calls it zero effort collaboration. One click is too many. So of course we don't mean zero effort. What we mean is below the threshold that you're willing to do. But the effort that you put into the collaboration has to correspond to the amount of benefit and the requirement that you need the other person for getting something out of it. And in many of these informal situations, that has to be very small. Okay, so following on from this, what you see in informal collaborations is the possibility that people can gradually get into an engagement and evaluate things like whether or not the other person's available, whether or not we really want to take the next step into going further towards conversation or further towards full collaboration. And the real world makes this quite easy. And so you can see a very complicated dance when two people are sort of trying to negotiate whether or not they should work together and whether it's a good time and so forth. So here are some of the things, just again in my lab, that you could see if you were interested in coming to talk to me. So first of all, you might see that my door is open, and so you get an initial clue that I'm there and that I might be available. And so then from my perspective, I'm sitting in my office, and I might see that someone's poked their head around the door and is now interested in my availability or in my presence, right? So this isn't just an information-seeking act by Tad. It's a public display that he's interested in information about me. So now the ball sort of returned to me, and I can either say, busy, or keep my head down to the desk, or look up and smile, invite him in. So I look over and I say, hi Tad, what's up, or something like that. And then he gets the sense that he can take the next move in this engagement. So then he comes in and sits down and talks to me about something. And then if we want to take another step, then maybe we get all the way into conversation, and maybe we get all the way into some sort of detailed work that we might want to do over some sort of artifact. Okay, so many steps may go on to make this happen. So there's a fairly rich vocabulary and a rich set of environmental cues and cultural and social cues that allow us to negotiate this business of, are we really going to do this, or is now a good time, and so forth. Okay, so the last part of this, the fact that we can move all the way into full-blown collaboration where we're both active, we're both working on stuff, he's got control, I've got control, whatever, is an important final part about informal collaboration, is that you can actually go all the way into as rich and detailed and closely coupled a collaboration as you might want to. Okay, so there's no point at which we have to say, okay, that's all we can do, let's stop, because this is just informal, and let's arrange a time to do this. We can just do it right now if we want to, and so we have a smooth transition all the way from just being aware of someone else right through to, full, closely coupled work over each other's tasks. Okay. So from those basic ideas about what informal collaboration is, we can pull out some design features for what Groupware should try to support if we're going to make it as easy to do informal collaboration in distributed Groupware as it is in the real world. And these are the 5 things. We should allow people to do individual work rather than some sort of shared document, or we should support individual work. And then immediately after that, we should provide awareness of what those different individual tasks are, so that we can see these triggers of people and task artifacts and interactions. Then we have to provide lightweight interaction so that we can have both easy communication and this negotiation of engagement where we can decide if now is the time or whatever. And then finally, we want to be able to go all the way and have full interaction over task artifacts. Okay, so that's going to be kind of what I'll call the gold standard or the design spec that I want to try and achieve. And these sort of follow into the awareness, communication, collaboration, in that some of these have to do with awareness, some of these have to do more with communication, and some with full-blown collaboration. Okay, so what does current Groupware do for this? Well, unfortunately, this is what you see most of the time when you start up a Groupware system or when you want to collaborate with somebody. And, you know, what's your server address again? And that port didn't work for me. And can you see my cursor and all this stuff? Now, this is an extreme example, and I'm going to talk a bit more about some of the systems that I've seen that solve parts of the problem. But in general, this is still what it's like to try and collaborate with somebody. So, you know, you think, oh yeah, so-and-so is going to be really valuable in this. I need to ask this question to them. So you start up the Groupware server, you start your application, or you load your document into the shared space. You find some way of sending an invitation to them, or you tell them to go back to their desk so that they can log on to this thing. They have to figure out all of the login information. You wait for them to connect. You do all those checks about, you know, can you see me, and how come I can't see you, and where are you? And then you collaborate. But the important thing is that remember that informal collaboration is only happening for 5 to 15 seconds, 30 seconds, or whatever, most of the time. We're just coming in saying, hey, can you look at this? You know, this should be over there. Okay, see you later. You're never going to do all of this stuff for 15 seconds worth of collaboration because it's going to take you, minutes for sure to get all of that set up. So this is the problem with most Groupware that we have right now. Now, again, I want to make the distinction between Groupware that supports planned meetings and explicit settings and stuff that is going to try and support informal collaboration. If you're having a planned meeting, you can afford to do all of this stuff because you have time to do that. Okay, so as I said, it's not all bad. And there are a number of things that I think we can draw from existing systems that have succeeded and even some of the research systems that are out there. And I'll go through some of these now and then show you some of the examples that I've come up with. First, so persistent representations, primarily from IM. Preambles, also from IM. Space-based systems, primarily from online gaming. And calm communication, again, from games. Okay, so first of all, I think of vital importance is that one of the most important things about IM is that they have a persistent representation of your community. Well, they have a representation of your community at all, right? You chose that those are the people on your buddy list. That defines a community. Maybe you've got different groups for work or play or whatever, but that's your community in some sense. And they're always there. Most Groupware systems, you only see people when they're logged in. Now, same thing happens here, but it happens, when you start up your computer and so forth, and they've gotten past the point of where you might or might not be logged in, and only when you're logged in can I see your status. You can pretty well tell that if people are there, then that's what you can see about them. Not only do you get persistence, but you get at least some notion of who's who. They're not very good at this stage of giving you any kind of identifying features, but they can do some things with personalization where you can put in your pictures, and at least you have the name. And people change their name, of course, to be more personalized, some of which I prevent you from identifying them, but at least it's personalization at some degree. Okay, and games do this as well. You can tell an awful lot about someone in EverQuest just by the way that they look. And in particular, you can tell that they're there. And when they log out of the system, their character doesn't go away. They just kind of go to sleep until they come back. And so you always get to see who's there and and what their status is. You also get to see other things like, what class of character they are and what weapons they're carrying and how much gold they have and so forth. And you'll start to notice now a variety of systems have started to integrate this idea of persistent representations into other kinds of systems, which I think is a great idea and a very important first step towards supporting informal collaboration. This is Activity Explorer from IBM. It was in I think a Kai paper a couple years ago, and they've got basically a buddy list with a chat system, an IM style system, integrated into this document repository system. You can ask questions about whether you're splitting the conversation between two different channels, the regular chat and this kind of chat. But at least when you're in this document system looking at documents, you can see everybody regardless of whether they're logged in and some sense of what they're doing. I also noted that Groove does this now as well in its most recent incarnation, where you get some kind of a community representation of awareness up there in the top corner. Okay, so persistence and identity and community are all vitally important. Preambles is another nice thing that you can at least see, where you can see in instant messaging. And this is a term that Bonnie John came up with in her interaction and outer action paper. And preambles are basically what you see here in the message window. It's very rare that someone pops a message up on your screen and just starts typing their question. They usually say, hi, or are you there, or something like that, and they wait because they don't know if you're busy and so forth. And this is basically the idea of the gradual engagement, right? So I want to make a conversational opening and see if you respond, and then I'll take the next step to actually get into some more closely coupled interaction. And so at least the fact that you can do this is a valuable aspect of instant messaging. Okay, next, the idea of using space and using spatial location to represent a variety of things, I think, is of some value. Games like EverQuest have a virtual world that stays persistent as well, and so different places in EverQuest have started to take on a variety of different meanings. And so the library apparently is where you go to get a quest from another non-game character. You then, you might go to the marketplace to find people to join you in the quest to go and slay the dragon, and so forth. But the important thing is that in most Groupware systems, there's very poor notion of place, unless it's a 3D virtual world where the place sort of is the whole point. But you don't get this sense that you go to a certain place to do certain kinds of things, and you can expect certain things about the people who are there by the place that they're in. One system that does sort of a good job of this is Babel, and that middle commons area has spatially organized representations of different people. I don't actually know if those are persistent. I need to find out about that, but you move closer into the circle depending on your activity, and so you can start to see, for example, if there are only two people in the middle, that they're talking to one another, which is something you can't see in a normal IM system. There have been a variety of place-based Groupware systems. This is the old TeamWave workplace system. And so the idea of having a space in which people can do their individual work is a valuable one. It's one that I'll come back to when I talk about some of the more recent prototypes. You could kind of walk around in this, if we can call this a virtual office, you could look around at what different people are doing. You could tour through the different rooms. You could get a sense of what other people are doing, and those things might generate opportunities for interaction that you could then take up on. There are a lot of other problems with this system that make it not so good for that, but it's certainly the idea of having place and allowing people to do individual work within that place and organize their own space in that place is a valuable one. And then last of the things I want to draw out of existing systems is this idea of calm communication. One of the things about informal collaboration is that if someone's kind of hanging outside the periphery of your workspace or says, Carl, if I'm really busy, I just ignore them. And it's possible to do this, and as long as the social protocols support that, I can just keep my nose down in my work, and that's both available to other people, but I can ignore all of the stuff that comes in. Nobody's popping up windows on my screen to demand my attention. So if you play games, you notice that most of the chat in games is this kind of chat that kind of fades in at the bottom and then moves up for a while and then fades out at the top. And this idea now, of course, I noticed when I was looking over the slides that I said calm communication and everything has an exclamation mark and everyone's dying, it looks like. So you can imagine that they're not very calm. That's not the kind of calm communication I'm talking about. It's the way in which it's presented in the screen. It kind of fades in and then it fades out again. And if you don't want to look at it, it's not in your face and it's not demanding your attention, which I think is important.
Doesn't your example expose a fair bit of information about how successful it is as a COM interface, or at least about the acceptability of a COM interface in this place?
Yes. Well,
Pocket server saying, I need a medic. Someone else says something, and Pocket server comes back a little while later on your green, I need a medic again.
right. Well, that also has to do with the price of human life in enemy territory, because you can say I need a medic, and in the real world I'd run over and I'd help you. But in ET, if it's not really low effort for me to come and help you, then you can just bleed to death. Which is part of the point, right? Is that these are the kind of things in this particular setting that you ignore, right? And so you want to ignore people's cries for help, which is kind of a sad state of affairs, but that's the way that it goes. Okay, so it's a let's call it a good interface adaptation to a sad state of affairs in the real world.
That works.
Okay. Okay, so here was my feature list, or my set of things that I want to see in Groupware, in shared workspace Groupware. And just as a reminder, before I move on to the prototypes that we've got, and I guess think about it. I would really like to know if you know of other systems. Challenge which of these things are already out there, because I'd certainly like to see that we're moving more in that direction. Because a lot of this was born just mostly out of frustration that we didn't seem to be getting anywhere with progress in Groupware. Anyway, so let's look at some examples, and I sort of loosely call these Communityware because they have to be based around an awareness of some kind of a community, whether it's a work community or a social one. And most of the examples that I'm going to show you have this idea of kind of a community browser, where you have some representation of people's activities, and often I've got it as a representation of their screen or of the task that they're currently working on. Mostly what I care about is those five design principles. I think that there are certainly a lot of potential problems with these, but they work really well as stalking horses to get the ideas out there and see what they're actually going to look like. We'll come back to this picture in a moment, but let's start with an early one to begin with. So these are Roger Bloom's prototypes, and Roger's a chess player. He plays a lot of online internet chess, and he said that the tools this is the free internet chess server, also called Fix, and he said that it's really hard to find a partner sometimes because they have this weird visualization of your skill level and your game type or something like that, and so you have to find some space in there to try and find a partner. And he said that it's not a lot like being in the chess club, the human chess club, which he also belongs to, where you can walk around and get to know the people, get to know who they like to play and how they like to play. And so he built basically a chess club version of the free internet chess server, where he gets all of the information down and observes all these games, and then you can virtually walk through all of these things. Now, one of the problems is that this chess club has 10,000 people in it, which makes it slightly more difficult to get to know everybody. But you could certainly imagine that we could now maybe even start partitioning the space even further, where we've got kind of rookie corner and different types of games. He's already got different types of games in different rooms, but you can imagine that people would self-organize this space if you gave them the opportunity, and then you could know where you just sort of hang out, and you could hang out with your friends, or you could go to a new place if you wanted a new challenge or something like that. You'll notice that some of these games are marked private, which is what the chess server does, so those people don't want to let information about their activities come out. Okay, so following on from that idea, Roger built a system that takes a simple Sketchpad application and then, I guess, thinks about the user community as the community, or all of the people within an organization who are using Sketchpad, and you could imagine all the people who are using Microsoft Word or PowerPoint or something like that. And let's show that user community each other's screens. So this motivating example for this is that maybe you're actually in an art room or you want to do something like this. But the more compelling example, I think, is for an application like PowerPoint or Photoshop is a good one, where you're always learning new things about the application. And it would be really valuable to be able to watch other people work, and when you see something interesting that they do, maybe to be able to zoom in and say, how did you do that? Or have them zoom into your system and say, could you do that thing that you just did on my system, like in my interface, so I can see how it works? Or see somebody does a particularly nice type of design and you want to start working with them or hire them or whatever. So the idea is that we can, with these systems that Roger's built, is that we can take any of these and we can zoom right into being a full Groupware system. So at the moment, these browsers are just like they're in sort of overview mode. We just see thumbnails of what everybody's doing, but if you click on those things, then you get into full Groupware, which is the last part of the whole point that I mentioned earlier. You have to be able to go all the way into full collaboration. Okay, here's the one I showed earlier. And this is our first attempt to do different applications in the same community browser. So taking the idea that we should let people do whatever they want to do, just work on your own individual work, and we're going to provide a sort of a virtual shared open plan office that you can virtually walk around, see things happen, see people, see conversations going on, see when people are interacting, and then when things interest you, you can zoom in and join the collaboration at some point. So there's a variety of things in here that we've tried to put in, and so for example, so everybody's got a distinctive avatar, just a 2D avatar. Everybody can see text, chat text. You just point to the person or to the workspace that you're interested in, start typing, and it sort of shows up in between, or if you're organized together up top. You can see that Edda's moved over from her workspace up to join David, and presumably they're playing chess together. You can overhear their conversation, and everybody can see that these two people are now in an interaction, and everybody can see that Amy has kind of moved over to the periphery of Jun's workspace, and presumably has some degree of interest in that. Okay, so think about whether you'd like to have your computer screen on someone else's overview. We'll come back to that issue in a minute. Yeah.
So Carl, so this is probably more related to non-work activities. Have you tried something like, maybe a Word document or PowerPoint with that? Because I think you probably will talk about some privacy things a bit later, right?
Right. Okay, so two answers to that. One is that this is our own system, and it's much too hard to build work applications that work within our protocols, and so we just built toy applications that make this work. So that's one reason why you don't see work-based activities in here. The other reason is a nice segue to the next slide, which is that the problem with that Walkabout system is that everybody has to play by our rules, right? So you have to build your system so that it talks to my system so that we can all use this community browser. And that's always been the problem with shared workspace groupware. If only everybody did it the same way, then we'd have a lot of interoperability that we don't now have. But the way in which you can get work-based stuff and sort of for free is by using screen sharing applications. And so this is the other prototype that we built that's based on the VNC screen sharing system. So VNC allows you to, just connect, look at the screen of anybody else's computer, and then take over control when you need it. And you can run multiple clients. So we got 6 people, each to run 5 VNC clients, shrink them down to 1/8 size, and then stick them on a separate monitor. And so what we got, this is basically what I would see on my extra monitor. And then, of course, my ordinary work would be on my primary monitor. So I see in thumbnail size what everybody's doing, much the way I would in that Walkabout system. I don't get any information at the moment about who is who or who's talking to whom or whatever. But I get to see whatever applications you're working on and the real mouse cursor movement in there. Now, of course, when I want to, I can zoom into one of these and I can join you in a collaboration session. The problem with this is that it doesn't have all the other stuff that we think is important, the people and the interactions. But it should be possible to fairly easily write a wrapper over top of a system like this that has notions of people, and that when someone's zoomed into someone else's screen, that their avatar moves over and stuff like that. And I'd like to, this is what I'll be talking to Anne about with live meeting later on, to see if this kind of stuff could be done there as well. And of course, this was far too much effort to set up because you have to do all of this resizing and joining and unjoining through dialog boxes. But the idea, I think, is one that could get around the whole problem of wanting to use work technology. Okay, and then the last one is this is Gregor McEwen here from Calgary, and his master's thesis system is kind of a cross between a shared poster board kind of system, notification style system, and Sideshow, which JJ's system from a few years ago. And he takes these kind of media elements that you'd put onto the post-it board, and you just run them down a strip down the side, and then you can zoom into them as you get interested in a variety of things. And so you could have screenshots down there, you could have pictures of people, like video elements and so forth, or a variety of different things. And then, presumably, I don't know if you can do it with his system, but then you could zoom into some sort of collaboration session. Okay, so those are a quick tour through a variety of different ways of doing this stuff. I want to stress, though, that those representations aren't what informal collaboration is all about. Really, it's the design principles that I think are most important. So just to, I guess, get you thinking about it, different things, here are some other representations that we could do. You could have a collage of screens or images or of some kind that kind of come up in order, either serial presentation style or, just sort of popping up on a screensaver style thing. And then you could click on something that interested you or maybe go back. This would be more like, I guess, taking a walk through a space and only seeing one thing at a time rather than seeing the bird's eye view that I showed of those 2D overviews. We could easily put some of this stuff into an IM system, or like conceptually easily, and there's room in the interface and so forth. We could put a lot more information about who's talking to whom, maybe let people overhear one another if they're both on your buddy list, show a screenshot beside them, or even if you haven't got the space, just show what application they're working on and what document they're working on, which might lead to additional, provide people with an opportunity to get into more close interaction. Of course, IM at the moment, it's very hard to go from the awareness and the communication into the collaboration sessions. Even though you can start up document sharing or application sharing from within IM, it should be only one click away. You should just be able to zoom right into it. And finally, another representation could be, if you're sitting at your desk and you have sort of a blank wall in front of you, it would be cool to project that 2D overview of the whole space onto the wall behind you so that you could use real peripheral vision to see when someone's virtually walking across the room to visit somebody else, or some text is calmly fading in and fading out, and things like that. So there are a variety of other representations, and I think that as we build these, some of the design factors and some of the better ways of doing them will start to come out. I'm not quite sure which one's going to be the right one yet, but we shall see over the next several months. Now, so these are the important things again, and let's take a look, though, at what some of the problems will be in trying to make this stuff work. And presumably that you've thought of some of these as well as we go through. If there are other ones, I'd certainly like to know about them as well. So one of the reasons why grand plans for shared workspace groupware have not worked over the last 10 years is that they require that everybody play the Dolphin way, or that everybody play the shared arc way, or that everybody play this way or that way. And so what people really want to do is they just want to do their normal work in their normal tools on their individual computer, and then they want the collaboration to happen automatically. So it's not Microsoft Word problem. There are two things that to say about this. Number one is that if we use the screen sharing approach, people can do whatever they want to do, and then we can build on top of that and just do collaboration transparency instead of collaboration awareness. Steve Whitaker's opinion is that screen sharing will cover 80 to 90% of the collaboration that you need to do. There's enough power in just being able to trade the cursor. So that might be all we need to do. The other side of this question, of course, is with the it's not Microsoft Word problem, is to get Microsoft to do this in Microsoft Office or in a variety of its suite, because you have the critical mass already here. And if Microsoft did it, then everybody else would do it that way. Okay, the too much effort problem. We talked about the low bar to getting into an informal collaboration. And even though some of the prototypes that I've talked about are relatively low effort, is it still too low or still too high for people to use it? If you have to start up even one more application that looks at your screen and starts and sends it off to the community browser, will people do it? The answer is that I don't really know whether this is going to be a showstopper. We'll have to try it in the real world. My suspicion is that if we can find a set of niche markets where the benefits of informal collaboration are high and where things like privacy concerns and maybe effort concerns aren't such a problem, we can at least get a toehold and conquer the world one niche at a time. And I think that things like software development teams are already used to working in, doing lots of stuff and setting up tools and so forth, and used to working together in a tightly coupled fashion. So it's possible that we'll look at that in the future. And then last, and I think maybe the biggest problem, is the privacy one. And the problem, of course, is that if you're going to share your activities and your presence and your availability with other people in your community, you're giving away information as well as providing them with opportunities to interact. There's actually a second problem, is that the more they know about you, the more they'll want to collaborate with you, which means the more that they'll interrupt you, and then you'll never get anything done. So there's both the privacy problem of you don't want them to see what's on your screen, and then you don't want them to like what they see and then come and take up all your time. The only thing I have to say about this is that people work in open plan offices now, and they find ways to make it work. So in my lab, you can see everybody's screen as I walk around, and somehow that works. Students continue to work in there. Yeah, comment.
Well, I think one of the issues is sort of scale and who's going to be the bouncer. I mean, I think why these open plan buildings work is that, the scale is right. I mean, they don't work if there's 1,000 people, right? And then it becomes the typing pool, and you don't get good interactions, right? It only works if there's some number that a sociologist can tell you, right? Yeah. The other thing is that presumably the company only hires good people, so I don't have to deal with the bozos by, dealing with people on my floor, right? So when I think about deploying this, for example, to help, developers within Microsoft, to some extent there are teams and things that give you these natural social boundaries, but I probably don't want to open myself up to every employee of Microsoft, because that's 60,000 people or something.
And I think that's a really important point, because it suggests that there are social rules and social ways of organizing work and workplace settings that naturally take care of some of these privacy problems. Like you said, either I know on my floor that there aren't any bozos, so I'm okay with it, but that's sort of a social interaction. Somehow it happened that this is a no-bozo floor. Or if I'm just working within my group, that was somehow done socially, and I like the people in my group or whatever. So the real question for me is how to figure out what these things are, or to start figuring out what these things are and see both how they translate into a virtual world like, that Walkabout system. Can we put things in there? Can we put the degree of richness and subtlety that people have in an open plan office that would allow them to either use the social protocols they already have for protecting their privacy or whatever, or that would allow them to adapt new ones?
Right.
So, for example, you work on stuff that maybe you don't want other people to see. You come in after hours when it's much less likely that somebody's going to walk past your office. And you could do the same thing in an online version. You could wait until there aren't very many people in the system or nobody in the system. You could have protections on what it takes for someone to look at you, 10 footsteps before they can see your screen or whatever. The thing that I don't know is exactly what those are and how those should translate into design principles.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm also wondering with respect to scale, I mean, so far in this talk, it's been mostly about direct interaction.
Yep.
But in terms of scale, you often get these situations of indirect interaction in that people will act as go-betweens or ambassadors between different groups. And so the way I interact with you is I interact with Mary Sherwinski, and Mary Sherwinski interacts with you. Right. And Mary knows both of us, so she knows what to tell me about you that's going to be interesting to me. Yep. And that allows things to scale up more.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think scale is definitely an issue, both from a computational perspective as well as from a social one. But the fact that, that people choose a set of buddies for an IM list is an interesting first step, I think, that if you're at least willing to, to choose a set of people and all the people in the world, and then maybe some of them are go-betweens or bridges between communities, we can certainly try and support that as well. So yeah, I don't know all of the answers to this. It's a big issue, and but I think that my hope is that in the real world somehow it happens. That somehow we're not paranoid about other people seeing our screens, or we've found ways to manage it if we are paranoid. And this is really the important one, because without awareness, then there's no informal collaboration. And the interesting thing is whether we can give you some awareness and get some informal collaboration, or whether we need to give you a lot of awareness to get any informal collaboration. And this is what I don't know. So the system that Yang showed me beforehand is one where you go into this work lounge system where you know your activities are going to be public, and you know that people are going to be able to see you. And so you've taken it's a different context where privacy has a different set of parameters. But I don't know if you're going to get a lot of informal collaboration with a little bit of privacy. Anyway.
I was just wondering if you did it that way. So the way in IAM you have busy, this, that, whatever. If you think of it in the context of a virtual space, I can set that, and I can move into a place where I would be in a collaborative mood.
Right.
Or I'm in a commons, or I'm in my office with the door closed.
Yeah.
And so that would be one queue that could handle that. The other might be able to right-click on a contact and see how many degrees of separation to that person.
Yeah.
Sort of the LinkedIn kind of concept of people in common. Another click could be on subject matter, so the areas in which I'm there. And then finally, there could be a way of getting, pinning how approachable or amenable people are to this, in the same sense of eBay. You get a star and how many, this is a good collaborator. This is a person who is not, or maybe a novice status. So those might be kinds of cues that would be easily placeable, designed in, design features that could give fairly quickly people, could ping and say, get all this information you need.
And one of the things I really like about that is, if you right-click to get maybe some more information about the person, is that those can be used as acts for the person who's being viewed as well. Like when Tad stuck his head around my door, he was getting information, but I was also seeing that he was interested. So if you ping me somehow, then I would get to see that, and then we can start this engagement process. So maybe, you don't get to see my screen right off the bat. You have to sort of express interest in it. And so at least now I know that you've expressed interest in it, and then I can either do something or not do something, and then, either it goes away or you get more and all this kind of thing. Complicated, but there's a variety of ways in which that mechanism could work.
And then a similar thing would be, again, seeing where you are, what you're doing, are you open to this? And then some way of similarly saying, you being able to respond, is it important? Yes, it is. No, it isn't.
Right.
Right. So I think these are pretty easily solved.
Yeah, in one way, people are always really concerned about privacy, but it works so well in the real world that that's going to come next, is looking at some of those mechanisms.
So it seems like the big difference, that there's awareness, but then there's also awareness. So in the real world, if you were to come over and look at my disk, I would know you're doing that. And it seems like in a lot of digital systems, that's what's lacking. I either put my stuff out in the public, and I don't know who's looking at it or what they're doing with it, or I have to sort of negotiate, a fairly lengthy process by which I make that transfer at some point.
Yeah, I think it's vital, because it's all about knowing who knows what, and the whole common ground thing. And the ideas have been around for a while. Like I think Montage or Piazza from Sun did this stuff where if you wanted to glance at somebody, they got an indication of that first, and they had to kind of return the ball before you could see the video and stuff like that. So those things are certainly possible. The question always is, how much effort do you want to make it, and how much management do you want to put on top of it? Am I going to be right-clicking on everybody's icon to say, you can see this much and you can see this much, and I'm this kind of person, and so forth?
You could have windows, I suppose, that you could sort of drag a document to, and this is sort of teamwork. This is individual work. So I could have the Word doc that is in a shareable folder if I okay it, and then the other is the letter to someone else, which is personal.
Yeah. No, and I agree, but sometimes you don't know that it should be shareable, right? Because it's the fact that somebody walks past it and sees that you're working on it and they say, oh, I need to tell you something about it.
Yeah, but I could drop it in if we negotiate and accept.
Right, yeah, that kind of stuff.
The icon of the document.
Yeah. I don't want to protect privacy so much that there's no more awareness, because then there's no informal collaboration, but I want to provide some way for letting people negotiate that stuff somehow and let these social rules come to be in some way.
So it seems like in the real world we don't really even negotiate those things. It's just a matter of, it's social mediation.
Yeah.
Because Ken knows that, I know he's watching me. He doesn't do it all the time. He doesn't frivolously come over and stare at my screen.
Yeah, it's highly self-regulated, but anthropology libraries are filled with stuff about how we look at each other and move closer and further away and all that kind of thing.
It's very subtle. It's not a very explicit negotiation, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's certainly all underneath the surface. And I think that it's all about providing richness and subtlety so that rich and subtle negotiations that don't look like negotiations can happen. Because nobody wants to, have a back and forth about, is this a good time or whatever. Yeah.
So it seems like, so you showed the screen sharing form of awareness. And the pixels on my screen, it seems like a microscopic, keyhole view on what I'm doing. It's both too revealing and not revealing enough.
Yeah.
And how do you push it up from that level?
Well, I think that, so this is the problem that most people have. You show them that VNC system and they say, I don't want to have that on there, because even at 1/8 size, you can see far too much. It's immediately recognizable that I'm playing games or whatever it is that you're not supposed to be doing, or working on my resume or something like that. It's a representational issue, and it's a great challenge for HCI. I think that there are a variety of things that could be done. You could fuzz it out. You could replace it with a more symbolic representation. You could.
That is what our group is collaborating around, is code. Fuzzing it out is turns it all looks the same.
Yes.
Just down-res just a little bit.
So what you'd hope in that situation is that the privacy issues people were more amenable to sharing specifics. And so maybe then you've got something that follows the currently active, the 10 lines in the IDE that's currently active, and rather than have a full screenshot or something like that. Now, this is the reason why it would be nice to have everybody play the same way, so that we could tell applications, give me the area around the cursor, give me an abstract representation that has this degree of, fuzz factor or whatever, so that we weren't just sort of faking it from the other end. And so I think that, within a generation ago, in Groupware terms, we were all talking about how we would be collaborating on our desktops. But I think that these are the kind of infrastructures that have to happen before it can all really work, is that someone has to have the open architecture for how applications are going to tell each other about what the people are doing inside them, and provide some kind of awareness information in a standard format, so that we can do all of these subtle things, like for this group, we want this kind of an awareness display, and for this group, we want snapshots and all that kind of thing.
Wouldn't you want to target that at the individual application layer, though? Like, the fact that I'm watching baseball in a corner of the window should be private and never represented right.
Yeah.
And the code that I'm working on here.
Yeah. Yeah, and then all of those things in that a screen is not necessarily a window, and what's the distinction between those two in terms of public and private space, and how much of it do I want to make people aware of, and so forth. So it could certainly be application level, but I think that there has to be, OS level infrastructure or toolkit level infrastructure to allow these applications to interoperate. In the final version, I think that there's a lot that we can do with things like screen sharing, at least if we figure out what the niche is first that we're trying to support, and then kind of design in some of the correct ways of doing the visualization. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up here. I'd love to talk. I think certainly there's more time booked for this seminar than I'm going to talk. So the main things to take home are that CSCW is known for many years that all work happens in a community. And so when I talk about individual work, I'm talking about individual work that happens in the context of workflow or in the context of social presence of other people. Co-located communities, it's quite clear, are set up to deal well with informal collaboration, and it works really well. It's the majority of the collaboration that happens, and it happens naturally, it happens easily. And so basically, this is where I'd like to see shared workspaces built, and I'm going to try and do it. If any of you are building shared workspaces and want to talk about it, please, by all means, let me know. So once again, some credits. If you there's a paper on this that if you're interested in sort of reading the text version. And as I said, this is a project in its early stages, and I'd love to talk to people more about it. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to talk some more.
Any more questions? Actually, one comment here is, so I think one of the reasons why the physically co-located workspace will work is all people in that shared space, they have a common project. Right? So if we're in the same project space, I don't mind share, I'm working on this document, and I let Gina know, because she may be able to help me on this particular document. But if we're working on very different things, showing me working on this document, number one, is probably invading my privacy. Number two is maybe too much information to interrupt Gina. So I think setting the context right is that's actually why we're trying to explore in work lounge.
Yeah.
What is the right context? If the context is right, sharing more detailed presence information is not a violation of the privacy. And if if I know Gina is working on a joint project with me, and she has many other projects, I know what's the right time for me to ask her a question. If she's working on project A, which is joint work with me, that's the right time for me to call her. But if she's working on project B and C, which has nothing to do with me, if I call her, that will be an interruption. But if it's more a project A, it may be a help for her. So estimating the right context of the whole space seems to.
But it's interesting, isn't it, that if Gina was in your community, however defined, and she was in this system, she's in your community for a reason. And so if she's in your community, doesn't that mean that you might want to know what she's doing? Sort of by definition, if she was really working on stuff that you didn't care about, then she's probably not in your community. And maybe it's a social community, but lots of stuff happens. That you could imagine lots of social interactions coming up from this ability to see what somebody's doing. Like you see that someone started up a game, and you say, "Oh, I'd like to join in." And so I agree that limiting it to certain contexts like project work could certainly make a difference in terms of making the awareness information that comes from the documents more relevant and reducing the privacy concerns. But it also means, by definition, that you miss opportunities for social stuff. Like we were talking at lunch about how in MSN now you can hook it up so that you can see the song that's playing on your media player. And that apparently, kids love it, right? Because you can say, hey, you like this kind of music. Let's talk about it, or whatever kids do these days. I'd really like to know how many informal, opportunistic conversations came up because of that information. And that stuff, of course, that's not work-related. And so I think, but you're absolutely right. It's all about context. It's just that there can be a variety of contexts that might overlap or whatever. Anyway, you have a comment?
Are you doing anything with co-located collaboration?
Not at the moment. In some ways, co-located collaboration, it makes all this stuff easy because you can see the other people and you can see what they're doing. We're doing a little bit where some people are co-located and other people are far away. So anyway, you thought of something when you asked the question. So is there a reason why? Do you see something in here that needs to be done?
Part of me is like if we can't even get the solution right with co-located collaboration, where I can already see what people are doing, and it seems like even there our tools kind of suck, frankly.
Yeah.
If we can't solve that case, then it seems like remote collaboration is almost hopeless. What's your take?
I think that in some ways co-located collaboration does work because that is the open plan office. And we don't need to have 2 mice on one computer because I can just grab the mouse. We have screen sharing because I can sit beside you and I can show you what I mean by clicking and doing whatever I need to do. So in terms of other kinds of co-located collaboration, like shared meeting rooms and tabletop systems and so forth, I don't know whether this stuff has any impact.
More questions? No? Okay, let's thank Paul.
Thanks very much. Do I have a card? I don't. Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.